So, curious, how many of you regularly use assessments in your work? If you use assessments, raise your hand. How many people have never used an assessment? Let's raise your hand as well. Never done it. Okay, actually not that many. So, how many folks are curious about assessments and maybe want to use them more? Okay, great, excellent. So assessments are a staple for my work. I use them extensively. Pretty much every coaching session has at least one assessment. Sometimes 3, even 4. They've become a staple for executive leadership and organizational coaching. If you are considering working in the organizational space, it's very common for organizations to ask, what tools are you certified in? That'll be one of their questions that you will get asked if you're going to be put on a roster in an organization that HR might contribute. Or if you're working for a big third-party global firm, they will ask that on their applications. And I'm a part of CoachSource, which is the largest global network of executive coaches, and I asked the chief coaching officer, who also is a friend of mine, I said, well, how important are assessments when you look at potential coaches for your network? And she said, well, I don't say no if they don't have one, but I wonder if they're really serious. It creates a question mark in her mind if they're really serious about coaching in the executive and leadership space. And, assessments aren't also just for leadership coaching. You can use them in pretty much every type of coaching. Certainly career coaching, life coaching, transition coaching. Whether they be complex instruments like we're going to be talking about today, or just the wheel of life, right? That can be a quick assessment just to understand where people are at. That's also assessment. Or looking at what people's core values are through a values checklist. So there are many assessments that can be powerful, and we're going to talk about all of those. So today's workshop is really about exploring the value of instruments, both to your clients and to your own business, how you can use it to promote your business, to expand your business, and to really support your clients. When to use assessments, the landscape of assessments, and we're going to be using integral theory. Anyone here a fan of Ken Wilber's integral theory? Okay, this might be new for a lot of you. Integral theory is a powerful way to really understand the landscape, and then probably most importantly, how to choose the best instrument for any coaching occasion. So we're going to make an effort to really give you guys some considerations that you might look at before you decide which assessment to use and when. So first of all, why use assessment? I'd just like to hear from the audience. What are some of the reasons you guys use assessments? How does it show up for you? Just yell it out for a few folks. Common language, yeah. Self-awareness. A couple more.
Awareness that other people are different from you.
Oh, important one. Awareness that others are different from you. Absolutely. So that was my first one, right? Self-awareness. Both your own awareness as a coach, which is an important part of your own use of self, but also awareness in your clients and what they are bringing to the table. It also provides common models or frameworks for improving performance. An assessment's a good way to actually give language to concepts that might be a little bit vague or ambiguous to folks. We're also talking about structure for you and your clients. Structure can be a helpful system without adding, too much of a directive approach, improving your credibility. Like I was mentioning with Kim C. McAnally saying that she questions whether coaches really are serious. It can create that credibility with your clients and with those that may be hiring you. Marketing your business. If you take a look at my own website, terryhildebrandt.com, you'll see a whole list of assessments that I'm certified in. Sometimes people will seek me out primarily because of the assessments that I'm certified in. And that will be the entry point, often from a marketing perspective. And then they can find out what else I offer. So it can be a powerful way to market your business and drive additional revenue and profit from instrument sales themselves. You can mark up instruments. Most of the instrument providers give coaches a discount. and then you become part of their distribution channel. So you might ask, when do we use the instruments? I use them mostly to kickstart a coaching program and to quickly learn a lot about your client. The Berkman instrument, which is one of my favorite tools, like Jenny mentioned earlier, they estimate you can save 2 years of time by giving this instrument. It normally would take 2 years to learn that much about a client. So you can very quickly jumpstart your coaching. Or evaluate the current state. 360s and leadership assessments, social and emotional intelligence assessments are really powerful for this. So you can find out where are they at as a baseline at the beginning of the session, and you can sometimes redo these instruments at the end to measure what progress you've made. Or adjust your coaching style. If you have also done these instruments, you will know what your dominant approaches are. And you're looking at a client that might need something really different from you, you can then adjust your style right from the beginning and more likely have an effective coaching relationship. Also to provide feedback, diagnose problems that might be showing up, measure progress on development, or just have some fun. A lot of people, especially in team coaching and group coaching, which Dr. Laura Hauser is going to be talking about team coaching this afternoon, it really is a fun way to get a team going, to get to know each other, to build some camaraderie, and to just get people to open up about what's going on for them. So these are all some of the powerful ways you can use instruments. I'm just curious from the audience, what other ways have you used instruments and when? Any quick yell outs from the group? Experiential learning. Great. Games. Excellent. So you can build in games. Other thoughts? Yeah, Kevin.
When the client requires it, it's part of a leadership development program, they use this instrument, so you got to do it.
Yeah, that's really the case. A lot of HR departments have their favorite tools, right? And it's just a standard part of the engagement. And it's a requirement. Whether you are a fan of instruments or not, you might need to use it to fulfill the requirements of that engagement. Absolutely. Other thoughts? Developmental purposes, absolutely. We'll be talking about some of the developmental instruments out there in just a minute. So let's talk about who can benefit from instruments. Certainly individuals, life coaching, leadership coaching, executive career coaching, teams for team building, team effectiveness. There are instruments that measure team effectiveness quite usefully. And whole organizations. You can do cultural change assessments, measure employee engagement. The Gallup organization is famous for measuring employee engagement, or other surveys out there. I also want to just talk about the types of assessments you can use. The main is the first major type, or what we call types. Types are flat or horizontal assessments. And it means that there's no good or bad, right? All of the assessments have a good outcome. Berkman, Myers-Briggs, social style, DISC, all of these essentially have positive attributes. And there's no higher, lower, better, worse, right? There's no right or wrong answers on these surveys. Most of them are self-raters. You can do multi-raters, but the majority of them are self-raters. They can also measure the interior or psychological aspects of a client, or they might measure your behaviors. And we'll talk about some examples of that. The other major category of assessments, what we might call levels and lines, and this is language of Ken Wilber's interval theory, types versus level lines. Levels and lines are vertical or hierarchical developmental stages, or stages of higher complexity and lower complexity, or maybe higher skill, lower skill. And they measure better or worse. There's actually a better outcome or a lower outcome, or more advanced or more complex or less complex. They often measure skills, competencies, complexity. They can be self-raters or based on others' feedback, such as a 360 tool. And just like types, they might measure interior psychological phenomena or behavioral phenomena. The third is the category is called states. States can change quickly. Examples of this are emotions or feelings, or maybe belief systems. You may have an old belief that you we move to a new belief. Or stress level. Anyone have a little stress in their life? So there are tools that can measure that. Or organizational and team climate. Employee engagement and satisfaction measures states. Or health-related type assessments. And these are just some examples. The points of view cards have folks that really get in touch with what emotions are coming up for them in any given moment. And we are using the points of view in our programs. Or ad hoc 1 to 10 scale. That's a form of measurement. Tell me on a 1 to 10 scale, how are you feeling right now? Or how excited are you? Or how concerned are you? Almost every coach uses that, but that's a form of measurement when you're looking at states. Or heart math. Heart math is an interesting system. Anyone familiar with Heart Math Institute? Quite a few folks. They have a little monitor that you can actually put on your finger, and it measures your heart rate coherence, which is a really cool measure of how well you are in touch with your heart energy, and whether you are under stress or not can sometimes affect that. And there are techniques, mostly through breathing and other forms of mindfulness, that can measure how incoherent you are. So that's another real practical biometric. Blood tests and hormone levels. And I know this usually doesn't come up in coaching, but I do a lot of work with people at midlife. And one of the things I will do is ask them to go to their physician and get blood work done. Because oftentimes there can be hormonal imbalances that are actually causing coaching issues and performance issues. And I'll just give you a quick example. I had one president of a major organization, wasn't sleeping, couldn't remember anything. I did 360s, and that was one of the major pieces of feedback, is he could never remember anyone's name, repeated the same things over and over. So I had him go to my hormone specialist. Sure enough, there was an imbalance. Once we got that fixed, his memory came back pretty much immediately, as well as his sleep patterns improved. So sometimes we need to be not necessarily experts in these areas, but at least know enough to know when you need to refer to a physician and maybe get some of these type of tests or measurements done. Group is another example here. So let's look a little bit deeper into types. So I mentioned earlier, types are important. There are those horizontal measures that we might want to look at. They can be either interior measures or exterior measures. And here's just a few examples of practical instruments that measure different types of things that may be interesting to you. So when we look at interior orientations, we're talking about values. Hogan does a great job there. Talents, Strength Finder. I know Diane is a huge fan of Strength Finder, so if you have any questions there, you can talk to her. Virtues and character strengths through VIA. Interpersonal needs is measured very effectively by Berkman. Interests, Berkman and Strong. Work team performance roles. Majerus and McCann's team management profile. Preferred work environment. Berkman also measures that. Or even archetypal energies. Anyone ever heard of the Pearson-Marr archetype indicator? Several of you have. It can measure what archetype in your life, which is really powerful if you do metaphorical work. Learning style, the Enneagram, and we'll be talking more about the Enneagram in a minute. And then, of course, psychological type. Myers-Briggs is a staple. Most people have gone through Myers-Briggs training. So all of these measure different types, such as orientation or interior approaches. When we look at exterior or behavioral approaches to types, we're talking about communication styles, such as DISC, conflict styles, how you approach conflict, the Thomas Kilmann indicator, decision making, as well as relating styles, such as a social style inventory, information gathering, organizational style, stress style, problem-solving style, leadership styles, personal coaching style, as well as interpersonal behavior. So all of these are behavioral surveys that can really help clients as well as coaches understand what's going on in any given moment. Yeah.
Are you going to make these available to us?
Yes, we're going to be posting these slides on the community of practice. So if you are not yet associated or haven't joined the community of practice, you can do that at ccop.fielding.edu. So it's just Coaching Community of Practice, or ccop.fielding.edu. So all of these can be really powerful ways of looking at types. And I'm just going to have you guys talk just for a moment at your table, just about 2 minutes. Talk about types in particular. And which of these do you think either you've used already or you think you might be curious about and would like to learn more? So take a moment to do that. All right, let's hear from a couple of folks, a couple of stories, how you've used types in your work. Anyone like to share? Let's hear from a couple of folks. How about you guys? You want to talk about Berkman?
Sure, I'll talk about Berkman.
Okay, if everyone could come on back. Okay, Allie's going to share a little bit about Berkman.
So actually we were talking about Berkman. I differ from Terry, but I prefer to use it after I've gotten to know someone a bit, largely because I feel like it allows both the client and myself to question the assessment and to dive into the assessment rather than using it as the default. But it is it's a robust assessment that allows you to. It offers such a level of detail that I find I can keep returning to it again and again and again. It offers new insights, and we come back to it even after months, and now with one client it's been a full year of kind of going into their career trajectory. So.
Great. Thank you, Allie. I agree. I use the Berkman throughout the whole conversation, the whole engagement for years and years sometimes with the client. Anyone else want to share a quick assessment story on types? So we have Charlene.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a story, but a question that Akash and I were just wondering about. And that is how could these, or do they map across ethnic culture? I hesitate in using a lot of them because I primarily coach women of color, in particular African American women. But I wondered about that, and if you or anyone else has any insights into which might be a better fit for when you're coaching across ethnicity versus others.
Yeah. So a lot of the instruments, they actually measure this, especially if they're going to be used in HR. One of the requirements is that there are no differences across culture. Because if they are differing across culture, then they're not really acceptable to use for selection and hiring and things of that nature. So that's something they pay a lot of attention to. And in many cases, they are specifically making sure that it doesn't exist. So it's kind of an interesting question. The one tool that does have a pretty big bias on gender is the Myers-Briggs. And most of you probably know that. And it's specifically on the thinking versus feeling scale. 75% of women score on feeling, and 25% of women score on thinking, and that's not true for men. For men, it's about, I think, 58% on thinking. So it's kind of flipped, actually, for men and women on Myers-Briggs.
Appreciate your question, and I just wanted to offer that strength finders is something that I've used. I think particularly with ethnic clients, we have been told many times about deficits, and with strength finders, it is completely strength-based. And so the language, I think, is useful, and there's no, even in terms of what may not be your strength, they don't call it a weakness, it's called basement. So I just wanted to offer that as one that you might want to put in your toolbox.
Great. Yeah, but all the really highly validated and reliable instruments look at country, regional, ethnic, gender, all those different demographics are an important part of the analysis of validity and reliability for sure. Great. Any last thought on types? Anyone else want to share a quick story? Okay, one more.
I signed up for a coaching program through buildings down beside them, the vets. So I don't know if anyone from the military in the room, but I learned the hard way that sometimes if you give an assessment to a vet with PTSD, it backfires severely. So one of the chaplains in the Navy explained to me that the entire military system is based on assessments and where you get placed and where you don't get placed. So just be careful, because I had to learn the hard way.
Great. Thank you for that. I think most of these instruments are designed for what we would call reasonably healthy, functioning adults. So someone who is suffering from mental illness, you do have to be extra careful because the tool may not be valid in those conditions. In coaching, we're not really looking at mental health and mental illness most of the time, but you may be coaching special populations like Sonia does, and that is something to certainly consider and be aware of. One more question over here. We'll go with both.
Well, I'm going to be the horrible person among a few here who's taking an opposing view about assessments, which is that, and this comes from my learning from EBC and my master's work, which was, assessments can sometimes get your head too much in the data and not looking up at what one of my professors told me was that everything is data. And I'll tell my clients, I can just walk in your office and collect a lot of data about what's going on here and how you're performing. So I'm very cautious with assessments. When a client in the chemistry call asks me, what assessments do you use? I will divert very quickly to talk about the idea that we need to create a hypothesis first about what's going on with you, and if we need an assessment, we'll use it to bring more data in. So I'm been very true to my training, Lenny, about not using assessments as a first place to stop, or even at all, unless I need to.
Okay. Yeah, certainly there's a lot of approaches. One.
So and I use assessments selectively as well. But I had an experience. So I'm within a university right now working internally. And in 16 years of being external and using assessments on occasion, I've never had it happen, what I've had in the last 2 years, where people are reluctant to use an assessment because they don't want to give their data to the outside party. The fear. So just kind of a caution as well. I had never experienced it. I've had it happen 3 times in the last 6 months. And so now we include language on what happens to the data so that people can choose whether they participate or not. So just a kind of another thing around what we never think of until it happens.
So this is a really important consideration around privacy, and we'll just kind of talk about it now for a moment. That is important when you are using assessments to let the folks know how it will be used and when and who has access to it. So I think that's a really important point. In general, just like all coaching has a confidentiality element to it, this is part of that, unless the group has other arrangements that you need to be aware of. Obviously, in team coaching, the point is to share the data, but you do need to get buy-in from the participants to be able to do that. Great. Let's move on to levels and lines. So this is a different class of instruments, and they measure typically skills, and these are some of the classic skills-based instruments that you might see. There's a lot of 360s out there. These are 3 360s that I find really helpful. The leadership, Circle 360, Korn Ferry, the management measures. Korn Ferry also measures management. Emotional and social intelligence is really popular right now, as well as many others that look at skills. Developmental, these are less common, but nonetheless they're very interesting. If you've never looked at some of these developmental surveys, we have orders of consciousness. A lot of people are familiar with Keegan, but they aren't necessarily as familiar with the tools. The subject-object interview or sentence completion test is a kind of a famous way to really measure orders of consciousness. Ego development by Suzanne Cook-Reuter. Value systems with spiral dynamics with Don Beck's work. And then Wisdomscape. And MBTI actually has a way to measure the maturity or how well you use perceiving and judgment in their step 3. Anyone familiar with step 3? It's less common, but it is an interesting program if you choose to get certified a step 3 consultant. So if anyone is interested in that, you can let me know. But all of these are looking at developmental stages of growth and can be really helpful in certain cases where your clients might be interested in that. So when we bring all this together, the integral map actually looks at both individual versus group approaches, and then interior versus exterior approaches. And these, what they call the 4 quadrants, where you're measuring psychological elements, behavioral, cultural, and social. Each of these quadrants actually has 3 different pieces you can look at. Types, which we have talked about, levels, lines, and states. So when you bring all this complexity together, you can find different tools for each of these. So we end up with 3 times 4 or 12 different aspects that you can look at in measurement. So this can be actually a helpful little tool, to go through and think about, all right, what kind of tools should I choose? Well, your first question is, are you looking at individual or group? Right? That's the first question. So you're looking at the top half or the bottom half of the map. Or are we looking at interior kind of measures or phenomenon or concepts? Or are we looking at more behavioral or exterior? And then are we also looking at types, lines, or states? Is it temporary phenomenon that kind of goes up and down and cycles? Well, we want to look at a states tool. If it's more of a typology, like an orientation, then we want to look at types or lines as more on the developmental or skill level. So you can see some of the common instruments that you might consider using the integral map. So how do you choose an instrument? Well, these are some key things you might look at. One of the factors is audience, of course, like we've talked about, individual versus team or group. Are we looking at what do you want to know? Do you want to know their type or their level or stage? Are we looking at interior, exterior? The cost is often a factor. Clients may or may not have the budget. Large organizations sometimes are not investing a lot in instruments, so you might go with something really low cost. Some of these are available on the web for free. You might use something like the Wheel of Life or Working Wheel of Life, or VIA. You can use that for character strengths. There's a lot that are available for really low cost. Or you might look at something way more expensive, like a Complex 360. And even some of the more advanced tools are not that expensive. For example, Berkman is only $140. Hogan's a little bit more expensive, but you can get a lot of data from one tool that you can use through the whole engagement. You also have to think about the data source. Are we talking about just a self-rater that only the client is involved in, or are we going to involve stakeholders? That can be important if the client is public or not about their coaching. If it's a very private situation, obviously you're not going to use a 360. But many organizations expect you to do a 360, and that can be in the form of an interview that you do on your own or using one of these computer-mediated sources. Time is important. Some surveys can be done in 10 minutes. Others can take up to an hour. Myers-Briggs step 3 is probably an hour-long survey. But most of them are in that 30-minute time range. Also, format. Do they have access to a computer where they can take the survey online, or do you need a paper survey? And also certification. Most of these tools may not require certification, but the more sophisticated ones do. Oftentimes certification can be 3-4 days long and cost up to $5,000 for one certification. So that is a consideration. However, investing in yourself and your own development can really pay off in a big way. And we'll talk more about some of the essential tools in a moment. And lastly, complexity, both for your own ability to master the tool and then for your clients to understand the tool. Do you have enough time to do an adequate job? Or do you have enough time in terms of working with them over a year that you might use pieces of it at different times? But all of that is important to consider. There are two essential tools that I think every, certainly leadership coach should have, and probably in some ways every life coach as well, certainly on the personality side. And these are my favorites. I'm certified and use all of these tools at different times. And a lot of times people ask me, so well, how do I know which one? Wow, there's so many choices. Number one factor would be, what do your clients want you to use? Right, on a practical level, you want to ask HR or the organizations you work for, what are your favorite tools? What do you require? So the main reason I started using Berkman is I work a lot with UCLA in their executive and leadership coaching programs. And to even get in the door, I had to be Berkman certified. And frankly, I had never heard of Berkman before that. Right? They don't advertise. It's not one of the big name tools like MBTI. But nonetheless, I went and got certified and trained and fell in love with it. And then I understood why UCLA uses it, because it is so powerful. But you might want to check out the market in your area, check out the specific clients that you want to work with, and decide which of these you might want to invest in. But I do recommend you invest in at least one. Integrative Enneagram is a relatively new tool, and you'll see on your tables that I have given you some handouts on the Integrative Enneagram. They have graciously giving everyone in the room a free one. Normally it costs $100 to go get that tool for yourself. On the last page you will see a URL, and you can go to that URL and take the Integrative Enneagram for free. And I have to tell you guys, I was a fan of the Enneagram for about 30 years. I first found out about it when I was an engineer, young, in my 20s, and took one of the free ones online and found it was really cool and interesting. But every one of the instruments out there that I found either seemed to be not that accurate, kind of hit and miss on whether it really determined your type, or the reporting was very technical, almost like a psychologist or someone who had a lot of background in Enneagram to interpret it. So this particular tool has really breached those two issues. They now have made it very accessible. They have an adaptive questionnaire that actually changes as you take the survey. So it very much hones in on your type. It is 95% accurate, which is unheard of for a psychometric. So this is probably the best tool in the market. That's why I encourage them to give us all a free sample so that you can check it out. Also, we have the Workplace Big Five. There are mainly two big categories of assessments when it comes to personality. There's Myers-Briggs and the Jungian tools that all are grounded in Carl Jung's work. The other is what's called the Big Five or five-factor model, which came out about 10 years after Myers-Briggs. And the Big Five are an empirical analysis, a factorial study of all the adjective checklist characteristics or traits that describe personality. So there's a number of these tools, Berkman, Hogan, and Workplace Big Five, and Neo-PI, if anyone knows Neo, in Europe it's pretty popular. Those are all in that same category of empirical Big Five tools. And then DISC is also great for communication, and Wiley has done a great job of taking that over and making those reports beautiful and practical and very useful. So these are just, if you don't have any of these, I highly recommend you invest in at least one. And if you'll notice, I also gave you guys a free copy of Choice magazine. Choice has done some great articles for fielding, and Laura Hauser has an article in the one on teams. Lenny Wildflower and I have written articles. So they have graciously given you copies, and some of those articles in there describe many of the workshops that we're going to have this week. And the one on helping leaders shine has my article on the 2 essential tools. You can also download these articles for free from Fielding's website. So if you go to the expert page on my bio, you can learn more about all of this. Also, just want to talk briefly about the leadership 360 tools. If you're doing leadership coaching at all, it is worth investing in a good 360. And these are some of, I think, the most popular and validated and useful tools on the market. You can always do your own stakeholder interviews, which is kind of the gold standard. It's nothing better than doing qualitative interviews, but it takes a long time. It's kind of expensive, and if you don't like spending all that time analyzing data, then it may not be the best choice, especially if you can't charge an extra $2,000 or $3,000 to do that analysis for someone. So if you want to do something quicker that is more based on a model, these other tools are really helpful, like the Leadership Circle Profile. And I also have a relationship with those guys. So you'll see on the table information about the Leadership Circle. Anyone familiar with it or seen it? Quite a few folks have. I think it's the most useful, powerful tool in the market. And there's 2 versions of it. You can do a self-rater. And anyone in the room right now can do that. It is available for you for free. That's why I brought information about this tool, because you have access to this and can do your own profile. You just go to their website, and on the first page it'll say, take a free sample survey. So that is available to you. I highly recommend you try it out, see what you learn about your own leadership, even if you're not in the corporate space. We're all leaders, no matter what space we're in. So it's important to think about that. We also have the Korn Ferry 360. They've been around a long time. It used to be called Lominger. For those who are familiar with Lominger, Korn Ferry bought them a few years back. They have a very robust tool that's very popular and some great support materials. And then the Social and Emotional Intelligence Profile. You also will have a handout on your table for this tool. Normally it's a $75 expense, and they have given all of you access to that tool too. So if you haven't yet ever done a Social and Emotional Intelligence Profile for yourself, grab one of those handouts. There's a link right at the top of the page, and you will be able to download your report immediately after taking the survey. So definitely would recommend you try it out. Yes, we have a question from Charlotte. Yeah, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, so I was asking the social and emotional intelligence profile, the differences between that and FIRO-B, but I think it measures something.
Yeah, FIRO-B is more on the personality side. So I consider FIRO-B similar to Berkman in a lot of ways, because it measures what they would call wanted behavior and expressed behavior. And Berkman and FIRO-B are the only 2 tools that I know of in the universe that measure this idea of what do I want from others. So they're pretty unique. Berkman has 9 measures. FIRO-B has 3. So Berkman is a much more inclusive and expansive tool than FIRO-B, but they're both quite powerful. And if you're certified in Myers-Briggs, you can already do FIRO-B as well. And that's available from ccp.com. Yes, we have a question from Kristen.
Do you ever experience, like highly analytical people need to have a database and an online 360 as opposed to a qualitative database? Meaning they need the data in order to really believe.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the answer is yes. So I do work a lot with technical folks, engineers, doctors, lawyers. Those are primarily my clients. So when you have lots of different stakeholders, versus 8 people you might interview versus 30 people that fill out an online survey, it certainly can help them have some more credibility to the data and believe it a little bit more. But, it's all about openness as well. Are they open to feedback or not? But certainly having more data is often better for them, especially if it's coming from multiple sources. So that's one of the reasons I usually do a personality assessment and a 360 together. And that's why I consider these two essential tools, because that helps triangulate essentially what might be actually going on in that situation. These are just a couple of others. Benchmarks from the Center for Creative Leadership is quite popular. And Wiley now has published a DISC 360, they call it 363, which adds in their personality as well as their leadership 360 feedback. So these are all just good standard tools. I promised you guys I'd say, well, what are some of the commonly used, powerful, accepted tools in the market? These are a lot of them. There are certainly others. This is not an exhaustive list. So Kuzner and Posner has a 360 as well, and there's many others out there. But these are the ones I consistently run into all the time in the market right now. So just to summarize, here are the 3 tools that you can take for free right now. So if you are interested in social and emotional intelligence, grab that flyer, take it with you. You can see the brochure on the Integrative Enneagram. That is a very powerful tool for looking at motivation and trying to look at deeper developmental and even spiritual development. I don't necessarily do the Enneagram with all of my clients. It's for people that really are willing to go a little deeper, because it will definitely shake up your world a little bit if you are ready to go there. And then the Leadership Circle, you can see their website. You can take the self-rater for free. If you want the 360 version, you do have to purchase that. It's about between $270 and $300 depending on the options. So I'd like to have another round of small group discussions. So how can you use assessments more in your business? What steps can you take now? What training might you want to invest in? And how can you perhaps partner with other coaches in the room or other partners that you have to leverage assessments? This is another strategy. If you're not quite ready to invest the money to get certified in one of these powerful tools, oftentimes it's good to bring in another coach who is, right? And you can piggyback getting that interpretation and assessment done and get the value of it. So let's have a little bit of table discussion and see what we learn regarding these questions. Okay, let's hear a couple report outs. So go ahead and raise your hand so we can get everyone to focus on the big group again. Go ahead and lift your left hand. We'll get everyone to calm down. That usually works. I know you guys always have a lot to talk about in a group of coaches. So who would like to share a couple of thoughts? Thoughts, comments, insights, questions? We have a couple over here.
Hi, I'm Rami Boucher. I have been liking against instruments forever. I managed to resist it when I was in cohort 8, and I have maintained that stand ever since. However, I really want to thank you for this. I feel like I'm much more open to getting certified. I am certified in an assessment, but I don't use it. I'm more open to using them, and I'm also backing on Dr. Kevin Norse's statement. I am convinced that people need to get heard and seen by their coach first. That's where and experience that this coach believes in them. Mm-hmm. And then we can do whatever else. But I really thought it was and I also thought the integrative modeling that you did with it was also very useful. Because aptitude and attitude, there's a lot of different things to do with all those things. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Other thoughts? Did you have a question? No. Okay. Anyone else like to share a thought, perspective, question? Okay. No? Any last thoughts? So, Allie.
stack up against other people all over the world.
Right.
And I guess there was a Harvard Business Review's article that stipulated, that kind of said, look, these results are invalid because people are assessing others based on their norm. So there isn't necessarily a norm there. And I was just wondering if you could respond to that, especially as we approach this with our clients and talk about the validity.
Yes, it's an interesting question. The validity of a 360 is an interesting idea because they're claiming to measure leadership. So they have their own framework. So there's an underlying model, and that's true for all of these. So there's already a big assumption, or many assumptions, on what is good leadership built into that. Now, most of those are based on years and years and years of research that goes back to saying, yes, if you exhibit these traits or behaviors or values, it can be any number of things, that creates good leadership. Specifically, Bob Anderson of the Leadership Circle, if you look at his instrumentation, it also has a measure not only of the traits and how you show up, but also whether your raters thought you were a good leader. So it measures overall effectiveness. So they have some really nice correlation data. And of course, all this is in context. So I think that's your point. However, nowadays, leaders are so global. There's many examples of global leadership where we can look cross-culturally and see how that shows up, even in one leader sometimes, who may have stakeholders across the entire globe. So it's a great question, and it's very complex, and there's no easy answer to that. But I think you have to look at the specific tool, what they're actually measuring, and who they're measuring, and who is giving input on those particular data. So all good things to consider. Any last questions, thoughts before we wrap up today's workshop on assessments? One last comment.
One of the things I found working with new coaches is that they rush to get into assessments. And that's a choice to make, but I find that a lot of times it's just to get clients to get your teeth cut. And that a lot of times assessments, I work with clients, organizations, I did a pharma that did a certification on an emotional intelligence instrument. They let the coaches come in and take advantage of their discount. Or when I was a member of the Chesapeake Bay OD network, they brought in someone to do the MCEC assessment. So maybe you can find cheaper alternatives because a client's using it and they're certifying people in it because they are expensive. I mean, $2,000, $3,000, $3,500 for assessment.
Training, you mean?
Yeah, for the training.
Yeah.
So it's an alternative to consider.
Absolutely. And by the way, going forward, as I mentioned earlier, Fielding is going to be doing this annual conference. Our next one's in July 2020. We are going to be asking all you guys if you are interested in coming out early and doing any training in these assessments. The three that we'll probably be considering will be Berkman, the Leadership Circle, and Integrative Enneagram. So we'll let you guys know. And by the way, all three of these organizations have been generous to Fielding and given us opportunities to have those instruments as part of our program so that our students can have access for those instruments to experience them themselves and gain use of self and self-awareness. So a core part of coaching these days. So thank you all.